Hello and welcome to a small introduction to China's Tencent as part of China's 100 most influential technology companies. My name is Clayton Jacobs. I work with ReadWrite as the head of media in China. And ReadWrite, we create landscapes of various industries. And landscape is essentially a list of companies broken down by industry and then by sector, to sort of explain how that industry is operating, to be able to focus on the most important news coming out of that section, and to be able to run lots of interesting different analytics. So as part of the landscape that we created for China's 100 most influential tech companies, I will be doing a video series in which I will introduce each of the companies in the list and be giving a short video lecture talking about all the different companies, everything from their financials to their products to what their future vision might be. So to start off the first episode, we're focusing on Tencent. And to get a better idea, let's first look at the landscape as a whole. Looking at this landscape here, if we look to the middle right, we can see that Tencent falls under the consumer industry, under specifically entertainment. Now, they fall into entertainment because of their beginnings as well as their strong sources of revenue even in the modern day and their continued investment moving forward. But even though they fall under entertainment, they do a lot more than just that. Here we're looking at the table of contents for this video. First, we'll explore the company history, beginning from its founding, and then we'll look at the executive team, or really about 4 key members of the executive team. Then moving on to their financials as well as their stock, because they are a publicly listed company. Then to their primary products, so the products that make them the most revenue, the products that they're most well known for, the products that sort of set them aside from other companies. Then to their long-term investments, as in things that I see them putting effort into right now, both in terms of strategy as well as resources, and what I think could have a large impact for them in the future. And then finally, we'll go to a wrap-up of kind of how the company stands in China as a whole, and what their future might look like. Let's now look at Tencent's history beginning back in November of 1998 in their founding. Now, their founding was in Guangdong province, which is where their current headquarters is located, in Nanshan district, Shenzhen. Their headquarters is actually only about a few kilometers from my apartment, and standing in the courtyard of my building, you can actually see the giant penguin logo, which represents Tencent on their massive building just a few kilometers away. And after their founding, probably the largest milestone for them was when the South African company Naspers purchased 46% of the company. Now, Naspers is a South African company and actually the largest company in Africa. They still own 34% of Tencent, which is now worth over $100 billion. And Naspers itself as a business has been around for a very long time, being founded over 100 years ago. And they've acted as a very strong mentor in terms of management and especially emerging markets and giving access to a lot of resources and really being instrumental in the growth of Tencent in China, as well as their emerging markets that we'll touch on later. And beyond this massive partnership and investment that came to them in 2001, the next milestone for them was really the large milestone for any company, which is going public, listing publicly. And so Tencent listed on the Hong Kong Exchange in 2004 and was later added to the Hang Seng Index in 2008, which I'll talk about more when we reach the financial section. But looking more at the product and the overall vision and perception of the company, 2007 to really 2009 was a major shift in terms of licensing games. One of the most popular games from this area was called Crossfire. It was originally a South Korean game, but Tencent licensed it and became extremely highly grossing. And Crossfire was not the only game, it was far from the only game. Tencent licensed dozens and dozens of games from South Korean and Japanese and some North American publishers, and was just gaining this massive following. in China, as they were not just putting out 2 or 3 games a year, as a lot of studios could only do because they were developing the games themselves. But instead, with licensing agreements, they could control a large portion of the gaming market. And we continued to see this dominance in the gaming market when they acquired a major stake of Riot Games in 2011. Now, this stake was about 94% of the company. And Riot Games produces a very popular MOBA, or massive online battle arena game known as League of Legends. League of Legends is one of the most popular esports, meaning that people take the video game into a competitive nature. There's tournaments, there's a lot of competition and money surrounding it. And this game is hugely popular all over the world, especially in the United States, South Korea, Eastern Europe, as well as China. And Tencent was originally licensing from Riot the ability to publish this game in China before they went through and ended up purchasing this company. And now their purchasing of Riot greatly affected one of their most highly grossing games in the modern day that I'll talk about when we get to their primary products. Going on to some of the key members of the executive team. First of all, and most famously, we have Pony Ma, or Ma Huateng. Pony Ma is the core founder, the CEO, the chairman, and really the face of the company publicly, and a very public face in China. And just recently, in August 2017, this month, he overtook Jack Ma of Alibaba as the richest man in China. Now, Ma Huateng in his early days had a lot of criticisms for being copycat or shanzhai of a lot of the different successful products, both overseas and domestically. But I'll touch on in the looking forward in the wrap up about why that mentality around Tencent is actually changing. Then we also have Martin Lau. Martin Lau is the president of Tencent. He wasn't one of the founders though. He joined Tencent in 2005 after having a career at Goldman Sachs. And Daniel Xu was also one of the core founders of Tencent back in 1998, and his current role as Chief Information Officer, as described, involves a lot of relations in the communities that Tencent has, whether it be gaming, instant messaging, WeChat as a whole, and he also is in charge of customer relations, consumer relations, and public relations, having a very core role in the overall image of how Tencent is presented to basically all different people who interact with the company. And then Alan Zhang is an extremely important person as a senior vice president, as well as the president of the Weixin, or WeChat group. Now, Alan is extremely famous in China as perhaps one of the most looked up to product managers in all of China. If you're looking to learn more about product management in China, as well as about WeChat specifically, looking up some of the talks that Alan has had in the past, as well as some of the content he's published himself, is a really good insight into how China's most elite innovators are looking at product creation, product management, and looking at the future as a whole. Just to start off and go over some of the basics of the financials for Tencent, they are a publicly listed company on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange as number 700 stock, and they are part of the Hang Seng Component Index on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which is composed of 50 companies that have a really good sort of estimate of how the overall Hong Kong market is doing. They entered this index in 2008 and have remained a part of it ever since. And going over just some of the basic statistics that are associated with this stock as of right now is the revenue was almost $23 billion US in 2016, and just recently in August 2017, they had a market cap of almost $400 billion, making them the 5th largest internet company in the world by revenue in terms of the 23 billion, but also looking at the market cap. They hit 2 very large, very impressive goals this year. In April, they surpassed Alibaba in terms of being the largest company in all of Asia. And then in May, they surpassed Wells Fargo, entering the world's top 10 most valuable companies overall. Moving on to perhaps the most interesting part of any company, which is their products. Starting off with is just the behemoth of products in general in China known as WeChat or Weixin. Now, WeChat in China is sort of incomprehensible for anybody who's only used to the Western way of messaging or social interactions or generally how things are done in a society, because WeChat is so many things mixed into one. I think an amazing statistic is that there's 938 million monthly active users, over 90% of which are actually located in China. Now, WeChat at its core is a messaging app, but it's so much more than that. In my everyday life, WeChat is used to pay my rent, to pay for taxis, to pay for food. The money system in WeChat is just so commonly accepted that you can essentially go cashless in most situations. But beyond that, there's other systems like Didi, which is essentially China's Uber, is actually built into WeChat. And it's created this whole lifestyle surrounding the application that has really been the source of Apple's competition with Tencent in China. Because when you have all of this packed into a single login within a single application, it begins to act as an operating system. Because there are many of these mini programs. And what I mean by that is that, Apple has this operating system that they've prided themselves on, that's easy to use, that's elegant. But when people are putting their entire lives through WeChat and they're communicating through WeChat messages as opposed to texting, and the applications that they need are already built into and all they have to do is log into it on any new phone, it becomes much, much easier to switch phones. And it becomes much, much easier to survive on a phone that doesn't necessarily have that really strong native operating system. So maybe a lower end Android phone or a Huawei phone, which has a full range of low tier to extremely high tier Android phones. You can immediately be up to date on this new phone just by immediately logging into your WeChat. WeChat is extremely powerful and it's only growing and it's only expanding, and it's by far Tencent's most powerful as well as most well-known and used product. And then we go to QQ. So Tencent QQ is sort of the original big Tencent product. It was an instant messenger. For Americans, think of AOL Instant Messenger. And QQ has really expanded into additional media. There's QQ Live, QQ Music, QQ Player. There's QQ.com, which is the most visited sort of homepage style website in all of China, reaching almost 900 million MAU, according to SimilarWeb. And they aggregate news from all around, just like you'd expect any of these landing pages to do. And QQ is still a strong brand. It's still a strong product line. QQ Highway was announced in Beijing just a few months ago to be released in December this year, which is going to be a product relating to real estate and real estate listings. And then the final core part of Tencent's business is the gaming industry. Now, the gaming industry I already touched on a little bit, but to go more into it, let's talk about two specific international acquisitions. Two in particular. So the first of which is ReadWrite Games, which I mentioned before, where in 2011 they acquired over 94% stake in the company. And this has really allowed them to start having a massive presence internationally. So League of Legends is an extremely popular game, and as Tencent has held onto their share and actually bought complete hold of ReadWrite Games, they now had their foot in the door for esports, for competitive gaming, and for popular casual gaming. And this led them to their purchasing of Supercell for several $billions. Now, Supercell makes mobile games like Clash of Clans and Clash Royale. Now, they bought the majority share of this company as well, and they've promoted the esports. But the most important thing to look at when seeing these Tencent acquisitions in the gaming industry is to see that the mentality of the development, of the product design, of the entire feel of the game doesn't change. which is how an acquisition like this should be, and why Tencent will continue to be able to successfully acquire these international gaming companies. Because they don't try to change the field. That's not what they're after. If they're purchasing a company, it's because they believe in what they're doing and they want them to stay the same. Now, when we look at their own created game, like Honor of Kings or 王者荣耀, now 王者荣耀 is just a massively popular game. It has about 500 million active users. And just to put into terms how profitable this game is or how much money it generates, is that it's actually a free to download game. So you don't pay anything to download it, but there's microtransactions. So there are things you can buy in the game that are purely cosmetic and don't change the outcome of the game at all. Yet they did over 1 billion US in revenue in a single quarter this year from this game. This game is insanely profitable. It's the most the most revenue generating game in the world. And if Tencent can continue to acquire companies that already have a strong foot in the door, help them expand, as well as creating these massive hits domestically, they are going to be a force that cannot be beat. I won't even say a force to be reckoned with, because they're already much more than a force to be reckoned with. They're a force that can't be beat in the gaming industry in China. The only competition that really gets put up against them is from a company called NetEase. And now NetEase is another company in the list of 100 most influential tech companies, and so I'll be talking about them at another time. But NetEase is targeting more of the hardcore gamers, the people who do it more as a lifestyle than something they just play in a taxi. But Tencent has the casual gaming market locked down. Looking at the long-term strategy of Tencent, I think there are sort of a few things to highlight. The first two items are not really major strategy pushes, although WeGame could be, but instead it's more to highlight general direction of focusing on gaming and still having investments in gaming and R&D and in-house products in gaming. So WeGame is an overall online platform that is going to port many games such as League of Legends and FIFA, which is the soccer electronic video game, and it's going to put them all onto a single platform that will be playable online and competitive and everything that Tencent loves about gaming. And then also they're working on the TGP box, better known as the Blade, which is a gaming console similar to that of an Xbox or a PlayStation. The reason that this is significant is that consoles were actually banned in China until about 2014, and only recently have sales of Xboxes and PlayStations been purely legal. They still happened fairly commonly before that time in sort of the gray market, but now they're purely legal. And there hasn't really been a Chinese manufacturer to make a gaming console. And so Tencent is obviously positioned better than anybody else to come out with this system. So this shows that they're really just trying to flush out and saturate every single part of the gaming market and make sure that where there's money to be made, they're making money there. But to move on more to expansion, especially WeChat expansion, India is a market that Tencent has been looking so aggressively at. And this is why the original investment from Naspers, the South African company, is so interesting, because they're terrific at international expansion, especially in emerging markets. And so India obviously has a lot of potential because of the people, just in terms of sheer population, as well as it's seen economic growth, not at the same level of China's middle class, but potentially it could get there in maybe a decade or two. And so Tencent wants to be there from the beginning. And this international WeChat in India is going to be a strong focus of theirs, I feel, for many years to come, until they try to sort of have the same market share in India that they have in China. Because, I mean, there's no real reason for them to run something like a promotional campaign in China when you have 938 million monthly active users, over 90% of which are from China, meaning you have over 2/3, well over 2/3, closer to 3/4 of an entire country using your software, that's pretty high saturation. And so looking elsewhere is a strong strategy. And international WeChat is something that's interesting. I actually personally had the chance to sit down with Stephen Wang. He is the director of user growth at WeChat. I wrote an article about my talking with him that I'll put in the description. And international WeChat is interesting because you can look at it from two different perspectives, or at least WeChat, from what Stephen was telling me, is looking at it from two different perspectives. The first of which is trying to capture Chinese users traveling internationally. Because Chinese users traveling internationally spend a lot of money abroad. A lot of money. I go into more details about this in my article, but it's a massive industry in and of itself. So getting malls in popular US locations, popular Canadian, Japanese, South Korean, anywhere that's a common tourist hotspot for Chinese users where they could go and use WeChat's payment, encourage them to spend even more money. And also, you can also look at international WeChat, of course, in the way of getting more Americans, more Canadians, more Europeans just on WeChat as the primary platform. I think that that's going to be more of an uphill battle for Tencent because right now they're extremely Chinese focused, and it might be something that we see in the future, but I'm honestly not sure if that's the best long-term investment for them. I think getting these international partnerships and wedging themselves into these markets and getting the benefit where they can find it is probably the best way for them to be operating at the moment. Of course, I'm sure Pony Ma is sitting in his beautiful 18,000 square foot Hong Kong estate thinking about world domination of WeChat. But it might not be something that's realistic, at least in the next 3 to 5 years for Tencent. Now, just to wrap up this video, I would like to sort of talk about how Tencent has been viewed by Chinese in the past and how I think that image is changing for the future. Now, I made reference to earlier the idea of them being copycats, or shanzhai. Shanzhai is just copycat in Mandarin. And if we're looking at all the innovation that's being done, I think that we're going to see a major shift in how people view Tencent as opposed to the other large technology companies in China. Now, BAT or BAT stands for Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. Now, these are the three largest, most representative of the technology market in China companies. And historically, Alibaba was larger, as well as they had a more strong reputation. Everybody loved Jack Ma or Ma Yun. And he was just this figure in China. He was looked very positively upon. Alibaba was seen as having great innovation. Lots of university students wanted to work there. And while Tencent has overtaken Alibaba in terms of monetary value, they still are fighting that image. And I think that this is a battle that Tencent can realistically win if they continue to produce new products, if they continue to innovate. And I think that they'll really become I think that they will become the most important of those three companies within BAT. Everybody, thank you so much for watching episode 1 of an introduction to China's 100 most influential technology companies. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it educational. To get the best news on all these 100 companies, subscribe to the newsletter from ReadWrite. I'll have a link. And this is the best way to get weekly updates on what are the most important stories you need to know. It's a good way to find the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more weekly video content, as well as if there's anything else in China that you're interested in knowing about, please do let me know. I appreciate any support that is given to this, and thank you. I'll see you next week.